Here. So in today's video, we're going to be discussing a little bit more about the credible threat theory coming from the Federal Reserve. Now, this is a speech that I am going to be reading from, given May 13th, 2024 by Philip Jefferson, who is a voting member of the FOMC. So those of you who are trying to figure out where monetary policy is headed to, it's not just Jerome Powell, right? He doesn't make the decisions on this. There's 12 voting members of the FOMC who are going to vote on monetary policy and where it is that interest rates should be headed to. Now, in this particular speech, it's titled Communicating about Monetary Policy. Those of you who have followed me on my channel for any length of time have heard me talk about credible threats, the credible threat theory. This speech goes into detail talking about the credible threats and how it is that they are used. Now, I'm not going to read from this whole speech. What I'm going to do is do a live stream tomorrow, members only, covering every word of this speech. We will break it down word for word, the entire thing. Now, I left a link down in the description so you can go and read the speech yourself and go and figure out what it is that they're trying to talk about. Or you can join the member-only live stream for tomorrow. But a couple of things that I wanted to bring up in here, let me see if I can scroll down and find it, is just some of the things that they are referring to as far as what it is that the monetary policy is doing with the jawboning, with the forward guidance, with the signaling, right? The words that they use. Now, listen to some of this, right? This is Jefferson talking about Loretta Mester, who is another voting member of the FOMC, and something that she had to say. Now, he goes on to say this. She went on to explain that when policymakers are systematic in their policy responses to changing economic conditions, the public will have a better idea of how the committee's monetary policy is likely to change in response to anticipated and unanticipated economic developments. In particular, she noted, with such knowledge, households and firms can plan better. They can make better savings, borrowing, and investment and employment decisions, right? So right there, this is, and she was saying this, Mester was saying this back in 2018, right? Now, this is important to understand because it is those words, that forward guidance, the idea of what it is that they plan on doing with monetary policy, that then now has the markets interpreting what it is that they plan on doing so that they can best make the best, excuse me, oh Lord, guys, so that they can make the best strategy positions for themselves. Now, the speech goes on to say this. The view reflected in Loretta's words seems commonplace now, but it wasn't always so. When Loretta joined the Federal Reserve Bank in Philadelphia, Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia in 1985, the FOMC didn't disclose its interest rate decisions. Now, this is important to understand. See, like back in the day, the Federal Reserve was very quiet. They didn't say anything. Like, they kept it very quiet. In fact, they didn't even talk about the adjustment of the monetary policy or the interest rates. It was just one day you woke up and bam, there it was. They were adjusted, right? It didn't, let's see here, it didn't even report that it had made a decision, right? This is talking about how the FOMC didn't disclose any of their decisions, right? In 1981, Karl Brunner, the Swiss monetary economist, called central banking the esoteric art and lamented central banks' quote, inherent impossibility to articulate its insight in explicit and intelligible words and sentences. Right? This is what he was saying. And that central bank's inherent impossibility, it's impossible, right, to articulate its insights in explicit and intelligible words and sentences. This is what Brunner had to say in 1981. At the time, central banking wisdom dictated that monetary policymakers should say as little as possible, right? Don't tell the public about what it is you're doing. Some research of that vintage tried to rationalize this secrecy through the notion that monetary policy would be particularly effective if it surprised the markets. In 1990, the central bank communication changed dramatically. In 1993, the Fed started to publish FOMC meeting minutes in their current form. And in 1994, it began releasing FOMC meeting transcripts with a 5-year lag. In February of 1994, the Fed started to publish the post-FOMC meeting FOMC meeting statements following meetings at which there was a change in the intended federal funds rate. You see what's happening here? So as time goes on, they're starting to put that forward guidance out there, trying to push the markets into a particular direction before they even move. Right? In May of 1999, the FOMC started to publish statements after every meeting, even on occasions when there was no change in policy. See, they went all the way from going where they wouldn't even talk about their changes in monetary policy to now they're giving statements even if they didn't change anything. By then, the move toward greater transparency was fully embraced by Chairman Greenspan, who had once prided himself on, quote, mumbling with great incoherence, right? Chose to be very vague and misunderstood with his communications. He made it that way, right? There were two primary reasons for this change. First, it was thought that greater transparency would demonstrate the Fed's accountability to the public and safeguard its political independence. The second, there was growing appreciation in the economics profession that clarity about the policy would improve economic or macroeconomic outcomes. You see that? There was greater appreciation in economic profession that clarity about the policy could improve macroeconomic outcomes, like giving them the insight ahead of time before they actually start to move, because then the markets start doing what it is that the Federal Reserve was actually wanting them to do. Expectations became a focal point in the academic and policy circles with the emergence of new Keynesian models in the 1990s as framework for monetary policy. In these models, aligning expectations of decision makers in the private sector with those policymakers produced superior economic outcomes. Did you guys get that? I mean, think about it right there. Their words that they were using, they were pushing out there to the markets, came up with, what do they refer to it as? Superior economic outcomes. Let me read it again. In these models, aligning the expectations, like, yo, hey, this is what we're about ready to do, right? Aligning the expectations of the decision makers in the private sector with those of the policymakers. So if they tell them, hey, this is what we're about ready to do, those people who are going to do the investments and, building businesses or doing whatever, that's the decision makers that they are referring to, right? So again, in these models, aligning the expectations of the decision makers in the private sector, right? All those people out there in the market, with those of the policymakers produce superior economic outcomes. See, before they even did anything, just literally using their words, right? Mike Woodford, one of the developers of the new Keynesian model, put it this way: not only do expectations about policy matter, but very little else matters. Bang, right there, right? And this is something that he said back in 2005, right? A while ago. Let me say it again. He said this is Mike Woodford, one of the developers of the new Keynesian model, this idea that they're going to be putting out this forward guidance and signaling, right? Developers of this new Keynesian model put it this way: not only do expectations about policy matter, but very little else matters. It's all about the expectations. How many times have I said that? Like, if you follow me on this channel, I have said that so many times. It's more about the expectations, about inflation expectations, about the expectations coming from the Federal Reserve than anything else, because that is their monetary policy. Think about it. This is what he is describing. They're not talking about adjusting interest rates. They're talking about jawboning. They're talking about signaling. They're talking about forward guidance. They're talking about credible threats, right? Communicating a policy strategy and following through on its communicating a policy strategy and following through on it increase the credibility of the central bank, and therefore its ability to steer expectations and the economy. You get that? Like, he's not talking about adjusting interest rates to steer the economy, literally talking about the communications. Right? Communicating a policy strategy and following through on it, right? So they have to follow through, very much like establishing the special purpose vehicles for the corporate debt lending facility. See, they didn't need to do it. After they made the announcements, the corporations pretty much funded themselves before the establishment of the special purpose vehicle. Just the announcement of it was enough to support the market. But they had to go through with it. They had to continue to create that special purpose vehicle and actually purchase some corporate debt so that it would continue to function the way that they were anticipating, even though they didn't have to buy any corporate debt. Just the expectations of it was enough. Right? Same thing. That's what he is saying right there. It's the ability to steer expectations and the economy. Clear communication also helps stabilize the economy and keep inflation closer to the target, because when the Fed clearly articulated a reaction function, financial markets would be able to anticipate the likely future course of monetary policy and help the central bank do its work by affecting long-term rates and other asset prices. See that? They didn't have to do anything. Just the anticipation of it would start to adjust the long-term rates. Let me read it again. Clear communication also helps stabilize the economy and keep inflation closer to the target, because when the Fed clearly articulated a reaction function, hey, we're going to do this, yo. Coming into the future, we're going to try that. We're going to do this, right? That's the communication they put out there, the credible threat. Financial markets would be able to anticipate the likely future course of monetary policy and help the central bank do its work by affecting long-term rates and other asset prices. They didn't have to do anything. They could just put out that statement, and then the market itself will start conducting itself in a way that the Federal Reserve was hoping for. Or needing, not even hoping for it. It's like as they needed it. All right. And I'm not going to go too much deeper into this because I really want to read the entire speech to you guys in a members-only live stream tomorrow. So be sure and sign up for the members-only live stream. There's a link down in the description for it. Let me see. I might read just a little bit more just because I think. Let me see. Is this it? Yeah. Let me read this last paragraph right here, and then we'll go through some of the comments. Jeez. Sorry, guys. I'm having like the hiccups today. All right. During the tenure of Chairman Bernanke, there was another burst of innovation in the way monetary policy was communicated. And remember, now, Bernanke, back in 2002, had a speech where he was referring to a gold machine. Right? And if you can imagine a guy who invents a gold machine who can produce as much gold at will with very little cost or energy, the moment that this information gets out to the market, the price of gold would plummet even before the guy produces a single ounce of gold or even has the machine to do it. Just the credible threat alone that he would be enough to start moving the markets. Ben Bernanke did a speech talking about that back in 2002, and it was deflation and how to prevent it from ever occurring here. Now, during the tenure of Chairman Bernanke, there was another burst of innovation in the way that policy was communicated. In 2007, the first SEP was published to convey systematically the economic outlook of the FOMC participants. In 2011, Chairman Bernanke started holding press conferences after every other FOMC meeting. In 2002, the Fed adopted an explicit inflation target of 2% and started publishing individual FOMC participants' views on appropriate future path of the Fed funds rate, now famously known as the dot plot. Right? I mean, remember the dot plot was what had everybody convinced that there was going to be like 7 interest rate cuts this year. During these years, Loretta, in her capacity as the research director of the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, contributed to ongoing work on communications and collaboration with policymakers and the Federal Reserve Board staff. So right there, like you can almost hear it within his words. Like Ben Bernanke was talking and referring to this dot plot, famously known as the dot plot map. By even having that dot plot map thing, where it says like these are the FOMC voting members and this is what they feel that interest rates should be in the future, and then they put it into like this graph that you could actually look at. That within itself was a communication that never existed prior to all the openness and transparency that is coming from the Federal Reserve. It is one of their tools to conduct forward guidance, to conduct their signaling, to do the credible threats, right? That's why when, at the end of the year last year, when everybody was just like, well, the FOMC just made this statement, or the Fed just made this statement about how it is that they're going to be cutting interest rates. And I was like, how, where, when did that happen? I didn't see that. And they're like, right there, that plot map thing, that dot plot. And I'm like, that doesn't count. That's not an actual policy decision, right? This is just where those FOMC voting members believe that interest rates should be in accordance to where the conditions are right now. Like, that doesn't mean that the conditions are going to be the same going into the future. They never are. They always change. And that's why that plot map thing, or that dot plot thing, it doesn't make any sense. It's just it's kind of more of like where they feel things are or should be in accordance to where it is today. Like, if these things continue on this way, this is where they will be. That's why it doesn't make any sense, because to me, I look at that and I find that an unrealistic way to guess on where it is that the Federal Reserve is going to be moving with their interest rates, because it's just like basically an illusion of a snapshot of the current conditions today, but that the current conditions today are not going to be the same going into the future. So to me, it's almost no importance to it. All right, let's go check out some of these super chats here. We got Dave Anderson with the $5. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate you. All right, Robert Shields, thank you so much for the $4.99. They want to see people losing jobs to decrease demand and lower inflation. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, that's what it's going to end up being, is a rise in unemployment that will eventually bring the inflation down, because less people earning money will be less consuming taking place within the economy. If you have less consumption, then you'll have supply start to rebalance with the demand, and there you'll find price stability start to come back. So ultimately, it's going to be a rise in unemployment that's going to bring inflation down. Something interesting about that is that on the flip side of that, low unemployment doesn't necessarily create the inflationary scenario that it once did. So the Federal Reserve used to look at like low unemployment as an inflationary pressure, right? That at some point that they're going to have inflation running rampant because they have low unemployment taking place. But that's now gone. Like, that doesn't exist anymore within the strategy. Like, that worked prior to the Great Financial Crisis. But after the Great Financial Crisis and the Federal Reserve hit the lower bound of zero, which is one of the reasons why they have to use their words more than the actual adjustment of interest rates to conduct themselves as far as monetary policy goes, because once they hit the lower bound of zero, adjusting interest rates was no longer an effective tool. But here they are at the lower bound of zero. Money is cheap, right? Easy access to money. What are they? Accommodating, right? That's the way they can, call it. In accommodating conditions, right? And so here you had this situation in which that would typically cause the inflationary scenario to start running rampant within the economy, but after the Great Financial Crisis, they couldn't get it. It failed because of the low interest rates and the lower bound of zero. The Federal Reserve had a hell of a time trying to find inflation. even with unemployment as low as it was, even with all the easy access to money with the low interest rates. Yeah, you saw things like houses and bonds and stocks and stuff like that go up, but the inflationary scenario that the Federal Reserve was looking for, they couldn't find it. It ran persistently under 2%. And they knew that that was going to be a problem when it came to the next downturn as far as the economy goes, because stimulating the economy with the adjustment of interest rates was no longer there. It just wasn't going to happen for them anymore. And they knew it. In fact, here, let me read this. In fact, I think he goes in to talk about it right here. Of course, this was an extraordinary time for monetary policy, as interest rates in most advanced economies were close to zero following the great financial crisis. See right there, most central banks around the world were close to zero, meaning that adjustment of interest rates was no longer going to work. See, the Federal Reserve would drop interest, or central banks would lower interest rates to spark people out there to go out there and borrow money to buy houses and cars and go on vacation and spend that money into the economy. But lowering interest rates, not being an effective tool, wasn't getting the people to go out there and spend the money, right? They weren't creating the money velocity like they would have normally done when they lowered interest rates, and it was because of the lower bound of zero. The FOMC employed forward guidance. See right there, they say it. We used forward guidance. Explicit communications about the future path of policy rates. You see this? I mean, again, let me read this. Of course, this was an extraordinary time for monetary policy, as interest rates in most advanced economies were close to zero following the great financial crisis. The FOMC employed forward guidance, explicit communications about the future path of policy rate, a key tool to deal with unprecedented situation. The research community had found that such forward guidance could be very effective in the context of the new Keynesian paradigm. You see this? Because they have shifted from using an adjustment of interest rates and shifted to using their words, they are finding that that forward guidance could be very effective in the context of the new Keynesian paradigm. When Loretta became president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland in 2014, she supported the continued use of forward guidance during these extraordinary times. In particular, to communicate a lower for longer policy that could provide accommodations in the presence of the effective lower bound constraint. You see what's happened right there? See, they knew it. They knew that the effective lower bound was going to be like a problem for monetary policy, at least from the interest rate standpoint, but they could always use their words, right? And she said it right there, that that the forward guidance during the extraordinary times, in particular, to communicate a lower for longer policy that could provide accommodation in the presence of the effective lower bound constraint. She also insisted that forward guidance could be used effectively even in normal times as means of clarifying the FOMC's reaction function. Bang, right there. Even in normal times, they are still going to use their words. See, this is why I don't look at the idea of the Federal Reserve adjusting interest rates is not the tool. It's the idea of it, right? See, people look at it as like, okay, so the tool is when they adjust interest rates. No, that's not the tool, right? It's not when they adjust interest rates. It's the talking about adjusting interest rates that's the tool. Right? Very important to understand, right? You got one that is an action and one that is a communication. The communication is the policy, not the action. The action used to be the policy, but the lower bound took that possibility away from them. They don't have that anymore, right? I mean, they have it, but it doesn't work very well, right? What does work extremely well is the jawboning, the forward guidance, the signaling, the credible threats. And this is what I've been trying to explain for months and months and months, years even, right? That this is the monetary policy of the Federal Reserve. But if you go and you look at the mainstream media and you listen to all these economists out there, they are all talking about the action of adjusting interest rates, but very few of them talk about the communications. as the policy. Right? They're all like, everybody looks at the actual changing to policy as the monetary policy tool. That's the way it used to be. It isn't that way anymore. She's explaining, or Jefferson explained that right here. All right, moving on. All right, Robert Shields, thank you so much for the $4.99. I think I already thanked you for that, but I appreciate you. All right, laugh my ass off. How's it going, Hyder? All right, all-nighter up in the house. Great. Stay Curious says, all it will take is a big move in the stock market or big unemployment, and they will cut rates. The pressure has been there for a long time. I doubt they can do the right thing. I don't know what is the right thing. Yeah. Let's see here. Big Cat says Federal Reserve are decreasing its balance sheet while keeping rates high. This is actually where they want to be so that there is dry powder for the next crisis. I can agree with something like that. Yeah. All right, Dickster, even if they cut rates, it won't go down that much because they will normalize rates. Well, even if they think, like, hell, let's just say they cut rates to 0 right now. Yes, it will have a major, major, major impact within the markets. Like, people will start to freak out and start, moving money around all over the place. But the real economic impact from those adjustments of rates won't take, but, they won't happen for another 6 months to a year down the road before it has that full impact into the economy. And so when you think about the adjustment of interest rates now, like, people are like, oh, the Federal Reserve is going to adjust interest rates for the, for the election or whatever. It's, I don't know what the point of that would be. It would be too late. Right? I mean, it would, by the time it does anything for the economy, it would be out there. Now, sure, it might have some political impact as far as the people's perception of what's happening at the moment, which I can imagine something like that happening. But that's not going to be an effective way of dealing with monetary policy, is to try and create a situation in which that people feel better about themselves or the economy so that they would vote for a particular president. That's not anywhere within the strategies of anything that I have ever heard, anything coming out of the Federal Reserve, ever. Not once. Like, if I could find something like that, I would blast it all over YouTube. I can't find it. Like, people talk about it all the time. And I'm thinking, can you please provide me with some sort of legitimate information or data that can actually prove that to be the case? Because I can't find it anywhere, right? Nowhere. What I do find is the stuff that I bring to you, which is straight up right from the Federal Reserve talking about their monetary policy, and it is very, very different from what it is that people are saying out there on the mainstream media and what most people believe is coming from the Federal Reserve. All right, moving on. Doing electrical, going well. Right on, all-nighter. Silver's on a tear. Yeah, so is gold, too. Okay. Jesus says, people borrow money when the federal government doesn't spend enough. Today, we don't spend enough on working people. Trickle-down economics doesn't work. Sure it does. I mean, does it work for you? No. But then, it works for some people out there. It didn't fail, like it didn't crash the economy. The economy's still working, right? It's still out there functioning. Trickle down, I mean, is it a good thing? Like, doesn't seem very good, as far as giving the rich and just let it trickle down to the poor. Doesn't sound right. But considering the Cantillon essay, I think that's just the natural way of operation, right? The people who have first access to the money, whether they can borrow that money, whether they can print that money, whether they can dig that money out of the ground, whoever has first access to it is the ones who it's going to benefit the most, right? And so, whether or not we consider it like a forced thing that the people who have first access to the money get to benefit from it, or if it's just a naturally occurring thing. It's just the way it is. I don't see it as a good or bad. It just is. All right. Trying to buy a used SUV need rate cuts. All right, Dave says Steve Eisman, big short guy, is going around saying, "Oi, the deficit crowd being the reserve currency, we can handle this." I mean, I don't know. Everybody is all freaking out about, how it is that the government's going to be able to afford this and deficit spending and trillions of dollars and interest payments and all this other stuff. And I mean, I listen to it and I just kind of get overwhelmed, and I'm like, wow, doesn't seem like it can work. It doesn't seem like it could last. Maybe we should just give up. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, I've been hearing this stuff my entire life since I was a little kid. Like I remember I had a social studies teacher talking about this money pit, and if you threw $100 bills into this pit, you would never be able to, at a certain pace, you would never be able to reach the budget or the deficits or whatever, and I just remember thinking, man, this stuff can't last. And that was when I was a little kid. And then during the great financial crisis, I thought for sure then when, went into the quantitative easing, I thought, man, this is going to totally destroy the dollar. I mean, how is it that the government's going to spend? I mean, I remember they had like all these images of how much Obama was spending, and, Glenn Beck was up on this damn like lift, he was like, look how much we're spending, we're way up here, and he's on this big old like man lift thing, and like, all these craziness. People thought, man, there's no way it could last. And that was like, 15 years ago, right? It's like, it gets to a point where you're thinking, okay, yeah, it's going to fail. It is. It's going to fail. But in the meantime, I'm going to do something about maybe working on investments and trying to progress and do something that's going to be better for myself. And then hopefully, be well positioned for an entire collapse of the dollar system, right? But I was so prepared for it back in like 2010, 11, I thought for sure it was done. Especially when silver started running up to $50 an ounce. I thought, man, here it is. This is it, man. We're on our way. Everybody else should have listened to me. I'm the smartest person in the world. Right? $50 an ounce silver, and everybody's going to lose all the stuff they had. They're all going to be homeless. They're all going to be broke, and I'm going to be awesome with my silver, And then, of course, we know what happened. It went from $50 an ounce all the way down into the teens, and I was completely upside down on my silver and never did quite recover from that. Like, still, like, I don't think, like, maybe I might be able to break even, like, right now, especially with silver running up the way it is. So, when you have a certain belief and then it doesn't come out, you have to figure out why it is that I was believing this way, but it didn't occur, right? I have to change my beliefs. I have to figure out what it is that is different from what it was that I was thinking back in the day, and why it is that we're now sitting in this situation. Like, I can't explain how it is that the government can continue to operate the way it does. It doesn't make any sense. And of course, that didn't make any sense to me a decade ago either. Right? So I don't try to figure out why it makes sense. It doesn't make sense. It shouldn't make sense. Right? So just understanding that it does exist. Right? There's a financial system. That's like the Federal Reserve. We have a government. We know what that is. Those are the politicians. We have our individual selves. We are the economy. Our decisions that we make, those things that we do, the businesses, the investments, the bartering that we do, how we use our skills, right? These are all separate things, and it's very important to look at it as a separate thing. You don't have to participate within the financial system. It's going to be very difficult considering that everybody else in the world uses it, but you don't have to borrow money from the banking system in order to buy a car. You could go to your rich uncle and borrow it and never once ever participate within the banking system. Right? But you have to know a rich uncle, or at least have a rich friend or something that you can borrow the money from. But since most people don't have a rich uncle or a rich friend who's going to lend them the money, the financial system, the Federal Reserve financial system exists, right? Because there's a demand for it coming from us, the individual who wants to buy a new car, but we don't have a rich uncle or a rich friend. You see? Like, it's just the way it is. It's not like, yeah, you can create it in a way that then puts pressure down on the working class people and absolutely elevates the elite. Yeah, that's the way the system is actually designed and built, right? But was it done for that intent? I mean, maybe, I guess. We didn't have to use it, All right, we don't have to go buy new cars. We don't have to live in new houses. We don't have to have nice clothes. We could live a life without luxuries, without a higher standard of living. We could have good manufacturing jobs and distribute our good products to the rest of the world. We don't. It's not in the cards. We don't play that game. Right? This is like, to believe that that's what we're headed to is delusional. It's not going to work like that. Man. We have to understand it for what it is. This is a problem. Yeah. Okay. Now it's a problem. It's not my problem. I understand what there's a problem. I have to conduct myself in a way that deals with the situation that's at hand. And that's really what it comes down to. It's not a problem. It's just an is. It's like the weather, Yeah. All right, moving on here. What time is it? Oh, shoot, guys, I gotta go. Okay, I'm gonna read one last question and then I gotta get out of here. All right, Kirk. Inflation is not going down because rates need to be much higher. Inflation is not going down because unemployment's not rising. That's ultimately what it comes down to. People have the money to spend. If you have a job, then you're probably going to make your payments. And if you're making your payments, on goes the system. All right. Nothing wrong with a silver nipple ring. I can agree with that. No, nothing wrong with that at all. All right, you can have all that with much less spending. Stay curious. Changing the game hurts the middle class. All right, Silver almost 32. This is real talk. Thank you. All right, I really appreciate it. We got to normalize not using debt. If we have to borrow for it, you simply can't afford it. Yeah. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Brody, for being here. I love silver. I love silver too, but I'm not married to it. Right? I mean, I'll hang out with silver for a while, but at some point we might have to part ways. All right. Yes, wealthy people or poor people don't care about interest rates. Thanks, Simon, and everyone. Thank you, all-nighter. Thank you for being here. You rock, Uneducated Economist. Been watching since the pandemic. Well, thank you very much. M a pineapple 15? I'm a pineapple? Is that what it is? All right. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much for being here. Uneducated Economist. Links are down in the description. Come back for the membership only tomorrow. I mean, it's going to be a great discussion. We have generally anywhere from 15 to 30 people or so who join in on those live streams, but it makes for a great discussion. A lot of times on these, open live streams like I have right now, the comments are just so overwhelming that we don't get to go through all of them. But in those member-only live streams, we read through every comment. We answer all the questions. The community is incredibly intelligent. There's all kinds of opinions and ideas and suggestions, and just to me, it's probably one of the best parts of the channel is doing those member-only live streams because of the concentration of really it's not necessarily people who understand things, but people who really do want to understand things. And so we don't have trolling and people insulting other people or whatever. None of that stuff is happening there. So it's a great community, and it's a great time to join in as far as the understanding of where it is that these beaches are leading the monetary policy to, right? Because that's really what we're trying to do, is understand through these speeches, through their communications, on what it is that the monetary policy is going to be going into the future. And really, I can't find any better way of doing it than to, have a discussion, a conversation about it. Okay, I gotta go. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know.